Let me in specifics read the verses that will be the basis for the sermon from today's Gospel. Starting with the first verse, on the Sabbath, when he went to dine at the house of the ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully. And then continuing to verse 7 through 14, now he told a parable to those who were invited, and he noticed how they chose their places of honor, saying to them, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, give your places to this person, and then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when you are honest, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher, and then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. He said also to the man who had invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends, or your brothers, or your relatives, or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return, and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, but you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. About 15 years ago, Karen and I had the privilege of attending a conference at Moody. And there was an outstanding preacher. I don't think I've ever heard a better preacher and a better storyteller than Bruce W. Fawn, who was one of the deans of the Dallas Theological Seminary. And his sermons were powerful. And on one occasion, he was exposing the text in 1 Peter, and he made the following statement that has stuck with me and Karen ever since. And the statement was, think differently and act deliberately. We have, excuse me, we have thought about that statement many times, and even though I don't agree with it, I think we can apply it to our text. I don't totally agree with it. And the text that how I wanted to apply it is to change the wording a little bit, to think differently and act accordingly. You see, the Bible is an invitation for us to think differently about life. The Bible is an invitation, especially in its parables, to invite us to think differently about who we are and who the people around us are. And unless we begin to understand that the way of the world is not the way that Jesus proclaimed. In fact, Paul in Romans 12 writes in a very powerful way, is translated by J.B. Phillips. He says, present your bodies as a living sacrifice. And then he says, do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. You see, Paul is emphasizing the importance of changing the way we look at the world, because we are so often tempted to look at the world in a way that it hurts our neighbor and doesn't benefit us at all. We think it might, but it doesn't in reality. And so Phillips, when he translates this, he says, do not allow the world to squeeze you into its mold. You see, the world is willing to take you the way you are as long as it can change you into what it wants you to be. And that's an incredibly important lesson for us to learn. Don't let the world squeeze you into its mold. Or to say it in another way, think differently and act accordingly. And that's what's happening in this text when you look about it. When we think about it in the 14th chapter of Luke, what we read in the 14th chapter of Luke is that Jesus has been watched carefully. He's been invited by one of the chief, most powerful men in Israel, the lead Pharisee. And he's there, and what does he do? He not only is carefully watching, he is carefully watching. And when he carefully watches, he sees that people are jockeying for position. This is a wedding feast in the parable, and the people want their position to be known, and so they put themselves first in the wedding table. Now, I hope I didn't do that at the wedding of Nicole and Nate. But you see, it's so tempting for us to think that the way for us to get ahead is to squeeze ourselves ahead of everybody else, is to jockey for positions so that we can honestly say, yeah, the next time we're meeting somebody, yeah, I was invited to that, and they had me sitting at da-da-da-da-da. And Jesus says, that's not the way to approach it. Because if you put yourself in the best position, which is what our tendency is, if we put ourselves in the best position, the lead person at the wedding may come up to you and say, hey, I don't think you belong here. I think you should step down a little bit. On the other hand, if the lead person sees that you are in one of the lowest positions, what does he do? He comes to you and says, it's time for you to come to the head table. It's time for you to come to a better table. Isn't that wonderful? And the principle is stated in this way. The principle says, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. What a lesson for all of us to learn. That we will be humbled if we exalt ourselves, and we will be exalted if we humble ourselves. But let's not fool ourselves. It is so entrenched in our way of living that we don't really notice it many times. And that is that we are constantly jockeying for position. Who wants the best seat in the church? Who wants the worst seat in the church? The best seat is up there in the far upper corner that people jockey for if they don't come in time. And we can make that kind of observation all around this particular table. Karen, by force, sits in the worst position. But that's just her lowly and humble state. She will be exalted. Okay. Now, so far, we've looked at one way that we need to change the way we look at life. But the whole Bible is filled with illustrations of how we are to think differently than the person on the street. But I would dare to suggest that most of us are so steeped in the way of the world that it's difficult for us to give up the way of the world in order to follow what Jesus is saying. But you know what? Here we are, and I ought to just sort of empathize with the leader in this particular situation, with the head lead Pharisee. Here is Jesus invited. What does he do? He not only breaks the law according to them, but he also tells them, the way you're doing this is all wrong. Criticizing his other guests. Is that the way we would like to have someone invited to act towards us or act towards other people? No. But he doesn't even stop there. Jesus doesn't stop there because he goes on to say, he said also to the men who had invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends. Hey, you've invited the wrong people, Jesus is saying. You invited the wrong people. You invited people who really don't belong here, but people who don't belong here in your eyesight. You should have invited the lame, the blind, the crippled, the hurt. Those are the people that we should invite. The next time we have a festival here, are we willing to accept the challenge of thinking differently and acting accordingly by inviting the people that Jesus points out as the ones he loves? You see, if we really want to follow Jesus, if we really want to be in his corner, so to speak, and if we really want to emphasize that, it's important for us to know that we cannot do that on our own, that we need to have Jesus help us in that endeavor. Only he can make it possible for us to invite the people that normally are not invited. And if you and I are truly disciples, then we should love the people that Jesus loved. We should love the people that Jesus loved, because those are the people that Jesus is telling us need us. In the 25th chapter of Matthew, for example, we find the same issue again and again. Think differently. Act accordingly. Are we willing, as a congregation, to do what Jesus challenged this great banquet in the parable to do, the banquet to do? Do you have any friends who are looked down by the world, looked at with suspicion, that we should be inviting here in this congregation to the feasts that we have? Is it just, should we have a pancake breakfast? Who should we invite? Are there people who are homeless? Are there people who are caught on drugs? Are there people who have broken hearts? Are there people that we could invite to a pancake breakfast? Just as Jesus points out for us. If we do, then we're thinking differently. And we're thinking obedient. There's a story which illustrates what I'm talking about. Søren Kierkegaard was a theologian and philosopher, Danish theologian and philosopher in the 1800s, early 1900s. And Søren Kierkegaard told the story, he loved telling stories. He told the story about a thief who went into a furniture store. And that thief did not do what most thieves do, is to steal the chairs or steal the tables or steal this bench or whatever. He actually just went around, collected all of the price tags, and then went back and put different price tags on the different objects. So that the sofa, which had been $450, let's say, suddenly was $10. But the commode for the toilet suddenly became very, very expensive, so on and so on. You see, that's what Jesus is inviting us to do. He's inviting us to change our value system so that we can live our lives differently and accordingly.